out. It didn't lead to anything specific with. I just don't think that it's gonna impact wrestling at all. I mean, there may be some thoughts into having these guys take those tests like the football players do.
Yeah, of course.
For the concussions. And I think that's as far as it will go. But I don't think it's going to have the impact that people will stop watching wrestling or say, hey, let's not have wrestling anymore, or let's change the way people do wrestling. I don't think that. And to think of it, was he still wrestling?
I believe he was doing shows here and there. So
Because we don't know where his life has gone since then. Chris Benoit was still in the WWE. He was a big part of what was going on at the time.
He was supposed to be on the card that night as well. They had a.
This is like Benoit's was like 2 or 3 years following him winning the championship. I mean, that was big news back then, and nothing really happened following it. Same thing with kind of when Owen Hart passed away in the ring.
Yeah, but Owen Hart is different, I feel, because.
But like it never impacted the way people do things in wrestling. Owen Hart tragically died, and they stopped people from lowering in the ring, which is a stupid act to begin with.
Yes.
But it didn't change anything. They still continued the event. They went on with Monday Night Raw afterwards. And I know that the lawsuit happened with the wife, and he's not going to be inducted into the Hall of Fame, probably because, the wife doesn't want anything to do with the wrestling.
Which is unfortunate. I understand where she's coming from, but from a fan's perspective, you just want to see Owen Hart in the Hall of Fame. I mean, Owen Hart, you grew up watching. He was always that underdog below Bret Hart, and you always rooted for him. I don't know about you, but he was one of my favorite mid-carders at the time, and we don't know. Unfortunately, we don't know what could have happened if he wasn't doing the whole Blue Blazer skit. Would he have been pushed to that next level? Because then towards the late 90s, you had The Rock leaving for movies. You had Stone Cold with nagging injuries. And then you had basically Triple H come in, and he was handed the title, and he was the main guy. But if Owen Hart was still around, could you have seen him possibly be that guy?
He should be that guy. He should have been that guy. He had the talent to be that guy. But so did Mr. Perfect. So did Kerry Von Erich, the Texas Tornado. He was, in the 1980s, he was the man. He fought Ric Flair for the NWA World Championship. He came to the WWE and
fell off.
He was a mid-carder. Same with Dusty Rhodes. Came to the WWE and became a mid-carder. Unless you're born and bred into the WWE, they really have not taken off. The only guy to really do that and succeed, to me, has been AJ Styles. The only one.
I have another one. Ric Flair, if you remember when he signed from WCW, he won the Royal Rumble and won the championship.
He had that good year, but he didn't stay.
No.
What would have happened after that? Once towards the end of his run, they kind of pushed him to the back. And so he went back to WCW. And then he came back, and I mean, he was, by that time, he was already,
But
his career
this
was
goes back, and we're going to wrap it up soon, but this goes back to our talk from the first segment about these guys coming in and being unutilized. Just look at guys like from the independents, like Sami Zayn, Kevin Owens. You had Rollins, who was hot for a while, and then that injury kind of put him on the shelf. And now, granted, he's the IC champion, but he's always that guy who's the first pay-per-view match of the night. You never see him anymore main eventing a pay-per-view. The list can go on and on. I mean, for a while you had Daniel Bryan, who was stuck in the middle until finally he was given that opportunity at that WrestleMania. But what I'm getting back to is you just kind of feel for these guys who made a name for themselves, and you kind of just you want them to get to that next level, but it seems like they can't get to that next level. And getting back to what we were saying, this All In, this Ring of Honor, New Japan, all these avenues are helping these guys out.
You know what I think the problem is, and it goes back to the WWE, and it's that they have way too many titles.
Agreed.
There's way too many titles, so people are expecting these guys to win. And when you have two heavyweight titles, and one of the guys is probably never going to lose the title because he's beaten everybody now, who is going to beat him? And he's beaten all the big guys. The Miz is not going to come in and beat a Brock Lesnar. Seth Rollins is not going to come in and beat a Brock Lesnar. They could have done something with Braun Strowman. They could have done something with Samoa Joe. They didn't do that either. Mm-hmm. He's beaten all those big guys. Sami Zayn would never beat Brock Lesnar for the title.
No.
There's too many of these titles. Back in the 80s and 90s, and that's why I focus so much on old school, there were 4 titles. The WWE title, mm-hmm. the Intercontinental title, and the Tag Team Championships. And that was it.
And then in the late 90s, you had the European, the
right.
heavyweight. But even those had meaning to them.
Right. The Intercontinental Championship was supposed to be your stepping stone to becoming the heavyweight championship.
Of course.
That's not really the case anymore.
No. I mean, Miz kind of brought it back. But,
right.
And now the Rollins has it, but it's still...
Also, the issue with guys like Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens is now, and even Roman Reigns, because I feel bad for Roman Reigns because everything is so scripted with him.
Yes.
That back in the 80s, you had Roddy Piper, you had Jake the Snake Roberts, you had Ted DiBiase, you had these guys who did not and should have gotten title runs and didn't, and they never needed the title, ever. Mm-hmm. Because they were allowed to build their characters.
Yeah, on their own.
Right.
But I think the part of that problem is, and we could talk about this all night. Part of that problem is once WWE went public, and they bought WCW, that's when we started getting that watered down product. And unfortunately, once you go public, you have to please your investors and please the shareholders.
Well, and obviously there's a lot more stuff than that. What made them so big in the late 90s was the Attitude Era. Obviously, you can't do that anymore.
No.
And it's not all Vince's fault, and it's not Linda's fault for wanting to run mm-hmm. for, Senate and then now working in the administration.
No,
we are in a different time change. Do you remember that video I sent you from the Attitude Era where DX is in the ring and they're pointing to a girl in the stands to take off her top?
Yeah.
And she takes off her top in front of over, I want to say, 30,000 people with kids in the stands?
Mm-hmm. And back then, that was, oh my God, that was...
Right. What? How many storylines were done back then that they could never do nowadays?
Also, you have people that get offended too easily.
Right. There's sensitivity. There's offensive. Mm-hmm. They're trying to reach out to more kids because now the kids is kind of the big audience. Mm-hmm. Their demographic has changed to where it was maybe 17 to 30-year-olds is now a younger demographic. Now there are maybe 5-year-olds up to 20, 25. I didn't go to my first wrestling event until I was, I want to say, 10 or 11. I watched most of it on TV. I didn't get to go to my first event until I was 10 or 11.
I think I was 12.
The demographic has changed. It's a whole different outlook.
But it's like a circle, because if you remember the 80s, they were kind of goofy and they're catered towards kids more so. Then you got to the 90s where the cheesy gimmicks, and then the late 90s was the Attitude Era. Like, oh, these kids are getting older. Now we got to cater to these kids that are now in their teens or going off to college.
Yeah, and Vince knew how to go with the times. Mm-hmm. But we're in a time now where the consumer is the one that's calling the shots.
Exactly.
They feel like they are more a part of the events than ever before.
Oh, of course.
They know who to cheer for.
And they go online and complain and go into chat rooms and say what's bothering them.
And it's their every right. They're buying into the product. They want to go to these events and they want to see the events, so they can do that. But,
I'm going to cancel my subscription. I'm telling you, this is the last month, they say.
You shouldn't complain. You should only complain to a certain extent, because now there's other outlets to look at. Besides having the WWE Network, and I love the WWE Network because for me, trying to go to a Blockbuster or Suncoast when they were closing and trying to find a Coliseum video for $10 and buy them, everything is on the network now.
Of course.
Everything. And I love that. I mean, I watch most of the pay-per-views and I'll watch them every time they'll come on, but
it's not the same.
I'm not the only one that didn't think Backlash was not great at Prudential Center.
A lot of people.
It was very disappointing. Mm-hmm. But they can do that when they're selling their event for $10.
Of course.
But now you can go and you can subscribe to Ring of Honor.
New Japan Wrestling.
They're $10. So is New Japan. New Japan is $10.
You have TNA, or I should say Impact. Now they're on.
They have their own network, and they've been posting old school stuff too with AJ Styles and some going way back with Jeff Jarrett and Scott Hall, and I saw Randy Savage come out of there in one of his last appearances. There's other things to watch.
And which brings us to what our original topic was All In. It's already starting to shape up, but this is just blowing the top off the little volcano.
Yeah. Not only did Cody Rhodes and the Young Bucks create this, but somehow this NWA title now is more important than it has been since his father held the title, and Ric Flair.
100% agree.
Didn't I tell you, I used to hate that title, the way it looked. And I'm like, you know what? That title looks great. It's old. That's a classic belt right there.
Old school, man.
That's the title. And whoever wins between Nick Aldis and Cody Rhodes, guarantee they're going to be going to New Japan and maybe showing up. Nick Aldis showed up in Ring of Honor. Look at what they're doing. Not saying that they're going to compete with WWE, not saying they're going to be better than WWE, because WWE is in its world of its own, but you do have options to look at, and you can go and watch something different if you want to.
Yes, you WWE fanboys don't always have to watch the network, and you don't always have to stick with one thing. There's many other federations and independent wrestling and other places to get your fix for wrestling.
And that's all you got to do, man. Give other things a chance. Don't stop watching WWE, because WWE is still good. They still got good stuff going on. Look at, and we've complained about the emphasis of the Intercontinental title and the tag team titles, and look at what they've done with those titles in the last couple of years. The Miz, who I think deserves a championship. I think it's his time. He worked that Intercontinental title so well that I think he deserves. He has been, maybe over the last couple of years, the most improved wrestler on the mic, in the ring. Do you remember going when we went to Extreme Rules and there was the Fatal 4-Way between him, Kevin Owens, and there was Sami Zayn was in it. And Cesaro, I think, was the fourth one in there.
Yeah, yes.
And they had that awesome match for the Intercontinental Championship.
Yep. And like you said, he makes you want to hate him, and that's a good performer. Let me tell you, when he comes out and you just look at him and say, "I can't stand him."
Oh, he's an Ant-Man guy for sure.
Oh, I know he's an Ant-Man. I enjoy him, but I enjoy the fact that he plays the heel so well. Is what I'm getting at.
And look at what Seth Rollins is doing with the Intercontinental Championship. He's having the best year that he's had, I think, since coming to the WWE on his own.
Agreed.
So, I mean, there's so much to watch, and still watch WWE, still tune into Ring of Honor and TNA, and now there's MLW as well. That's another thing that you've been watching.
That's another, we'll get into that more down the road. We'll talk about that. I think that's going to be the next up-and-coming show. I mean, it's on a small network right now, but to me it seems like they have the power to keep the momentum going.
The moral of this episode